In our understanding and appreciation of literature, we are often influenced, I feel, by our earliest experiences. And my single biggest influence in the way that I approach literature and the teaching of it is in the teaching that I experienced in my A-level course. It was the first time that I'd been asked to consider what literature was, and I learned very quickly from my teacher that literature stems from an oral tradition. It's one of the oldest art forms that we have. Its endurance is because it provides us with the opportunity to live through the experiences of those who have gone before us in order that we can learn from those experiences and perhaps avoid some of the pitfalls. But texts are also ambiguous, and I feel that this is one of the most important aspects that we need to convey to young people when we are encouraging them to read literature, and when we hopefully are encouraging a lifelong enjoyment of literature. They're ambiguous, and into that ambiguity we can place ourselves, because the reader, the audience, is a fundamental part of literature in of itself. One of the concerns that I have about the way that literature is currently taught is that because of pressures from things like examinations, we're often stuck asking this question: what does it mean? And the truth is, there is no single answer to that. Now, for lots of teachers, that is a great benefit of literature. It's one of the things that children actually, though, really struggle with. And there are lots of textbooks and there are lots of teaching approaches that seem to want to cram students, because at the moment, one of the things that we're really privileged is that terminal examination, providing students with the right answer. The answer that's going to get them the best grades, the answer that's going to get them into the best universities or the best job prospects. And we aren't actually focused on what's the right answer for literature. If we look at the purposes of assessment, we can see that as well as summative assessment and formative assessment, we've got diagnostic assessment where we can analyse the strengths, the weaknesses, the knowledge, the skills. And it's a really important part of the study of literature, that it's not just about learning about those texts and the knowledge of those texts, but it's about the skills of analysis, the skills of discussion, the skills of consideration, of empathy, of being able to value one judgment or opinion against another. And those are really, really important for the softer skills that are needed in the modern workplace, and I believe in the future. In answering the question, why study Shakespeare, I'm going to go back again to my A-level classroom and to one of those really first experiences that I had with the approach to teaching Shakespeare and more widely literature that I have chosen to take myself, and also one which I think has been really quite popular over the years and really should be given a fresh airing, as it were. And I was exposed to texts which were edited by a gentleman called Rex Gibson. He was a teacher and an academic in Cambridge, England, some years back. And he was the editor of the School Shakespeare series. And in one of his most fundamental texts that he wrote, which is actually called Teaching Shakespeare, a Handbook for Teachers, he explains his reasons for teaching Shakespeare. And he says an easy answer to the question why teach Shakespeare is why not. After all, many teachers can give examples like the ones here of their students' intense engagement with the plays. It's a class of 11-year-olds who create a thrilling dance drama of the episode of Prospero relates in The Tempest, in which Sycorax and her potent ministers imprison Ariel in a cloven pine. Or the 13-year-olds who bring the market square of Verona to bustling life, into which the feud of the Montagues and Capulets then violently erupts. And it goes on, and he gives more examples. But he really hones in on the cooperation that exists in such classrooms as students work together on their Shakespeare mirrors the creative experimental ethos of the theatrical rehearsal room, where individual talents unite in cooperative enterprise, and the self-evident commitments of such students and the satisfying sense of pleasure in the group and individual achievements are usually experienced directly only by those who share them. Now, there are a couple of things that I think are really important here. One, and it goes back to that oral tradition, is that the appreciation of literature is a collective experience. It's something that brings us together. And secondly, it's that opportunity to help shape their own meanings. And I think that is something that's been missed. There isn't a single meaning to many of these texts. In fact, the coming together of the reader and the author, or the audience and the author, and their joint meanings is what really makes text relevant. It's what means that they still mean something in context to us, and that's really important. Gibson expands on this and he says, the more public response to the question of why to teach Shakespeare can be organised under 4 headings. Abiding and familiar concerns, the idea that texts are still relevant, they cover things that are still open for discussion, they help us rehearse those discussions. Number 2, student development. By working through some of these things together, we can actually help a child develop. In rehearsing a play or rehearsing a performance, we're almost rehearsing certain things for life. Language. We all know that the exposure to sophisticated, complicated language through reading is one of the things that advances our own vocabulary. I know that myself, and I see it especially when I am working with students for whom English is not their first language, that they're able to articulate things in a way that would not be possible through just language lessons. And removing literature from the study of English and just focusing on those language skills, I think is rather reductive and deprives an English language learner of these other vital aspects that literature brings to the study of a foreign language. And then this final one, which is really, really important, this idea of otherness. The idea that through literature, as Keats says, you can travel in realms that you would never have thought possible. You can have the experience of somebody who you will never be. That's a really important aspect, and I'm delighted today that I'm sharing a platform with Professor Malachi, and I think he has brought together some of these fundamental aspects that I'm talking about in terms of literature. Literature is a common heritage. It's something that brings us together. Literature is about performance. I attended one of Professor Malachi's readings at the Penang Literary Festival, and I was really taken by the joint and collaborative nature of the event and the enjoyment that we have together. That's why I've got his book, which I will recommend to people. But the other thing that this book has taught me is about my experience of Malaysia and about my appreciation of the people, of their concerns, of their feelings, their understandings of certain things. That's a really important lesson for our children to learn. So Gibson, through his work, created what we call an active approach to Shakespeare, and I was particularly taken by that. And when I became a teacher, I was very happy to continue to use these texts that Gibson and others had edited sometime before I even went to school. However, in 2008, I was delighted to be asked to be part of the team who was revising these edited texts, and I worked on 2. I worked on Much Ado About Nothing and Twelfth Night. And one of the things that we tried to do when we were putting this together, we tried to adopt the active Shakespeare approach, the approach of collaboration, the approach of getting the play on its feet. So much is lost when you are teaching Shakespeare as just text on the page. It's so much more than that. It's about feelings, it's about emotions, and getting students to understand the way that they would think, the way that they would feel, and perhaps even the way that they would act in relation to many of these things is halfway to getting to them to understand the potential meanings that literature provides for them. And I think that's a really important thing. So you will see that, half of this book is dedicated to those activities, and that's really what they are. Too often the study of literature is passive. It's something to be taught. Whereas my feeling is it is absolutely something to be experienced. So these are some fundamental questions that I think that teachers need to grapple with, and these are some of the points that I would like teachers these questions to consider. How do we support students to enjoy text? And what I mean by that is, do we read the text with students? Do we model how we read text with students? I think that's really important. Model the enjoyment of reading a text. Secondly, are they involved? How do you scaffold that experience in the safety of your classroom so that when they go away, they're able to do that themselves in private? A second question, what opportunities can we provide to elicit personal responses? Do we ask, how do the texts make students think, feel and act? Do we provide activities that encourage these responses? These texts they're not the only texts that do. So when you are looking at texts and textbooks, do search out those that what I would say, bring a play onto its feet. And finally, what assessments should we use in the classroom? Do we always need to assess through writing? Just because terminal examinations privilege assessment through writing, that doesn't mean to say that we need to do that in our own classrooms. There are other opportunities to assess students' understanding, and actually the way that they think, the way that they feel, and the way that they would act based on text is actually quite difficult to assess through writing, which normally focuses on analysis of language. These are not skills that we should neglect, but let's get that balance in there. And there is still a really important criterion in examinations which focuses on personal responses, on contextual readings. Let's make sure that we privilege that as well. And do we help students develop and share meanings so that they can incorporate these into writing? Talking, discussion, listening to other people, building on those experiences. There is a really, really valuable experience, a really valuable learning opportunity that students should do before they go into examinations. Again, I come back to that idea of performance. The classroom is a rehearsal. It's an opportunity to rehearse these skills. Let's make sure that students have the opportunity to do that. And fundamentally, it should be fun. Now, I know that's difficult when there are certain pressures, but we have an opportunity, and I think we have a duty to ensure that students have access to all that literature is able to provide, and that is a wealth of experience for those that have the privilege to be able to access it. And I think by making it an activity and an enjoyment, we're able to ensure that we do our students a great service.